If you want to learn how to gain insights you can act on and solve business problems with data, all while building a data-driven culture at your organization, sign up for Pragmatic Institute's new course, Data Science for Business Leaders. Find out more at pragmaticinstitute.com/data. Welcome to Data Chats, a podcast by Pragmatic Institute and the Data Incubator, where we tackle data topics and trends with experts, industry leaders, instructors, and alumni. I'm your host, Chris Richardson. Today, I'm sitting down with Zack Wenthe, Customer Data Platform Evangelist for Treasure Data, leading enterprise customer data platform. Zack is passionate about breaking down silos, operating more efficiently, and developing a true understanding of customers while building an emotional connection, something I want to really dig into today. Thank you for being here, Zack. Let's jump into it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. So thanks for having me and excited to be here and kind of talk about this. So my background, I've always been a marketer, or at least professionally. I went to college originally thinking I was going to go into theater, and then realized I probably wasn't going to make any money doing that. So then I kind of moved over to marketing, and I realized marketing is kind of just the theater side of business.
Yeah, I can see
and it was a perfect transition. So yeah, I started my career in marketing, and then I ended up moving over to kind of out of, traditional brand and digital marketing into consulting and working with large organizations, typically with some sort of technology implementation, whether that was a marketing automation platform, a CRM, web content management, personalization, you name it. So I ran digital strategy, persona development, use case development, a lot of that for major organizations. And then the last handful of years, I've kind of made the shift to the product world and been working with CDPs, or customer data platforms, as kind of the holy grail of marketing, of bringing all of the customer data together in one place so marketers truly have an understanding. It's something we've always talked about, or I've always talked about with customers and brands. And so it just seemed like the right place to land.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things I want to ask about that in particular, but one of the things I liked in terms of the setup for you that we did is that you're looking to develop a true understanding of customers. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, because that word "true" just stuck out to me. What are some of those problems when we're trying to understand customers that a true understanding would maybe help fix in some way? Like, what does it mean to really get a true understanding?
True. Yeah. So often, brands operate in not even just department silos, but even channel silos, right? So you have the email version of Chris, and you have the loyalty program version of Chris. And so what happens is when you, as a consumer, interact with a brand, you see them as one entity. Often when a brand interacts with a consumer, they see you as 37 different profiles across 10 different systems, some outdated, some they don't even know they have data around you in. And so the reality is they're not talking to you as Chris, right? They're talking to you as whatever fragmented version of that system has. And so, over the years, there's been, multiple challenges and from a technical perspective and from an operations perspective to bring that together. But really the idea of that true understanding is you have to bring all the data together. You have to create a meaningful profile of the individual that's connecting those systems. And then more importantly, not just bring it into one place, right? A data warehouse can do that. You have to then meaningfully move that data back out to the email system. So now it can react and interact based on what's happening in the loyalty platform, or what's happening if you walk into a physical store, or you call into a call center. We've all experienced that world where we call in a call center and they have no idea who we are. They're asking us what phone number we're calling from, even though we're on the phone number that we're calling from, So it's that idea of really treating that one-to-one relationship like it's actually a thing.
Yeah, and I guess it sounds so simple when you say that. So why don't more companies and organizations do this? What are some of the main challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, I think, yeah, right. You're right. It sounds simple, and it is conceptually, right?
Yeah.
Bringing all the data together is conceptually easy. The reality is, until even just recent years, we didn't have the scale of database and graph type systems to be able to bring that data together meaningfully outside of like an IT organization who was constantly managing that system, right? So being able to do it in a self-serve way. So a marketing organization or a customer support organization can be working with those large volumes of data without having to have a data engineering background or writing a bunch of SQL or whatnot. So I think we had to wait for technology to catch up a little bit. And then we had to go beyond the idea of just, for the nerds in the crowd, we had to go beyond the idea of like just a pure relational database, right? Kind of
Mhm.
V1 of this was CRM. CRM is like, oh, we're going to bring everything together. The problem is that's a bunch of static fields. Well, how do you take, Chris's work profile and his his personal profile and then put them together meaningfully? Because during the day you're in work mode, right? And you operate in work mode. And at night you operate in, consumer mode. And so one of the challenges that I always try to use as an example when people say, well, isn't it the same? And I said, yes, except for when you behave differently. So I'll give you an example. I travel for work a lot, right? And I'm on planes, I'm in airports, I'm in hotels, and I go to a coffee chain. The way I buy Monday through Friday at said coffee chain is I buy for myself in the morning before I get on a plane, maybe something in the afternoon, but I'm buying for myself. And I do that all week long. But then on the weekend, when I'm home and I'm with my kids, I go in and I might buy for myself, my wife, I buy an oatmeal, I buy some muffin, like I buy as a consumer. And those are two very different behaviors, right? And so
Mm.
if you only talk to the person as, well, okay, he's mostly in work mode. So it's the only offers we're going to run, the promotions we're going to run, the incentives we're going to run. You leave out a whole segment of my buying behavior. Conversely, you do the inverse and you only pay attention to where I'm spending a lot at once. You
Yeah.
forget that 90% of the time I'm buying solo, right? And so you have to combine those two realities to really, so it takes a mindset shift, it takes a technology piece, and it takes a willingness to change and break some things along the way.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you about next is what are some of those changes along the last, I don't know, however far back you want to go, and not just necessarily in the application or the specifications that obviously computing power, data availability has gotten better, but what are some of those changes that have potentially helped us get to where we need to be or getting there?
Well, I think honestly, for good or bad, the pandemic drove a lot of those changes
Mm.
because it forced brands to create, I mean, we've been talking digital transformation. People have been talking digital transformation for a long time, but it really forced that hand in so many organizations, so many
Yeah.
businesses, because there was no physical option anymore. It also really drove a very big consumer shift. We see, and we talk about this reality that the consumer's in charge now. The people who were scared of shopping online aren't scared of shopping online anymore. Like we have people have I do have groceries delivered to my door. Like I don't go into the grocery store the same way. I don't buy the same. And the world has gotten so much smaller too, in the sense that we figured out that, oh, our favorite brand who we bought from all along, had supply chain issues and they didn't have something. And all of a sudden people found an alternative.
Mhm.
People now order, things online from across the world all the time. And so the way we just interact and buy and consume and do meetings on Zoom and have interactions with people has just dramatically changed, which is now putting a lot of control in the power of the consumer. Consumer kind of decides how they want to interact, and brands now have to keep up. It's not, here's my journey, consumer, you have to go come follow it. The
Mhm.
consumer saying, hey, this is how I want to transact, and I'm going to go find a business that wants to do it my way.
Yeah, and I think that probably ties, at least in some way, to the emotional connection that you also talk about. So, yeah, maybe you could start by sort of defining how you see an emotional connection in this case, and what are some of the strategies to really, I don't know if capitalize is the right word, but really harness that emotional connection. What is it, and how can we use it better?
Yeah. So first, an emotional connection obviously is where you have some emotional reaction to a brand, good or bad, right? And obviously brands want it to be good. We all have kind of an internal scorecard that we kind of keep on brands that we do business with. Those that have a higher kind of reaction, right? Happiness, delight, whatever those feelings are you have towards the brand and how you do business with them. So it's not just, I think the big thing is not just how you feel about the brand, but how you feel about your interactions with the brand and shopping with them. Because there's some we might love what they stand for. We are fully behind them as a mission. But if they're painful and hard to do business with and they're frustrating and every time you interact with them, you're like you walk away upset, you're still not going to do business with them. Right. And so
Yeah.
that's the emotional connection, is understanding that consumers, they don't just invest dollars, they invest energy, really, right? It's kind of woo woo, but like they invest energy when they deal with brands, and the brands that they like and they feel good about will exponentially spend more with. We do. Studies after studies after studies show that the brands we like and make us feel good, we spend more money with. So, very simply, taking a step as a brand, stepping back and saying, hey, these aren't just profiles, these aren't just IDs, but how are we interacting with people in a way that is meaningful and exciting for them? And again, it's one of those realities that, again, sounds easier than it is, but it's really not hard because there's some simple steps, and I know we're going to talk about them today, but I mean, there's some simple things all brands can be doing. It starts with the idea of saying, though, hey, we do want to have that emotional connection, emotional engagement with our customers beyond just the traditional brand advertising where it's, you see during the Super Bowl where brands put up something that's either meant to make you cry or make you laugh or whatever. Like, it goes deeper than that. It's got to go below the surface.
Yeah, and I wonder if more and more people in marketing, especially, are thinking in that way, and if there's any risk. It reminds me a little bit of, either emotionally charged content, like in advertising or something, where you can understand that if a bunch of things are kind of dull and something really hits somebody, that's going to be great. But then if everybody is emotionally charged, then you just kind of get exhausted and you kind of want something not so emotionally charged. And I know that's not exactly what you're saying, but I wonder if there are ways to go kind of too far to one side or the other when we're dealing with these emotional connections. Because for example, like if I'm changing my tires or whatever, I don't really feel like I need an emotional connection to those tires. If I'm making a choice of what to buy, maybe I'm wrong in terms of the research. How do you gauge these things?
Yeah. So I think there's a difference between emotional connection and intensity, right? So you can kind of
Yeah.
think of it on a quadrant, right? There's the intensity of that emotional connection. So everything doesn't have to be overly dramatic or screaming in your face to kind of get
Yeah.
to get attention. But we as consumers, we make decisions emotionally and then we justify them logically
Yeah.
every time. Right? So when you're buying new tires, you're probably buying them from a place of either safety because of if your family's riding with them, or you're buying them from a position of fun because you like to go out. You've got a, if you've got a coupe and you're driving, you want something sport. Like there's a feeling you're trying to solve for with that tire.
Hmm.
So does every brand have to tie into that? No, but should there be an element of that if you're selling safety? There are messages that are meaningful and somebody's going to go, oh yeah, okay, that aligns with what I'm looking for.
Hmm.
Therefore, if nothing else, it opens you up to then looking at them, having the conversation, going a bit deeper. No, you're right. There's clickbait for the sake of like,
Hmm.
just, or trying to go viral. That's not what I'm even talking about. I think the idea is really more the idea understanding that when we buy, features and benefits are secondary, right? We
Yeah.
connect to a brand. We have, I mean, I guarantee you walk around your house and you think about like, okay, I bought this. Why did I buy this? Like, you'll justify it, but there are people you go with and you're like, I have no idea why I still shop with them. I just like them. I just, they're just my favorite. And so that's the side of it that I think, most people miss. And more importantly, it's also the side that data unlocks a lot of conversations around because we can start to think about how do we get to understand our consumers better. Therefore, we can talk to them meaningfully and leverage data that we're already collecting, often in many cases, and tie it into our strategies from a product perspective, from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. And I wonder though how you envision or what strategies you've come across that really help put those two things together that often, at least, in popular consciousness, seem very disparate. You have emotional connection and then you have data, cold numbers, binary
Yep.
algorithms, whatever, right? Like that's the opposite of a sort of an emotional connection, at least when you think of it in that way. But of course, data can help us do a lot of things. Emotional understanding can help us do a lot of things. How do those two worlds come together in effective ways?
Yeah. So let me give you an example from a customer of ours, right? So we've got a customer who is a direct to consumer healthy, like prepackaged healthy meals, delivery service, right? So they food comes to your door, you make it. So as they were discussing, one of the conversations that they had is, as marketers, we should never argue about who our ideal customer profile is. Like we should never have like it should just be a given. It should be a no. And yet they were often because they had debates, right? It's like, are we going after athletes? Who are we? And if you look at their advertising and you looked at their their website and you look at their messaging, it is very focused around the athlete, right? The runner, the triathlete, the, whatever, the CrossFit, all of those people who are, health conscious, health focused. And yet, when they were going through an investment round, their investors challenged them on, like, what is your, this is what you say your persona is, but what is it really? Like, who are, let's look at the data. And so they did. They said, okay, let's go look at people who are spending a lot of money with us, often repeating purchases. They took all of that transactional data. They took all of their in-house like content, because they produce hundreds of blogs. They took all the content that they're consuming, and then they went out and bought some third-party data, some demographic data, some psychographic data, some behavioral data from data vendors, and blended all that together and came up with the profile. And their most profitable, most engaged customer was not an athlete at all. It was a aging parent who either has kids who are in high school and are running around and aren't home very often, or recently empty nesters. They want to be health conscious, but they don't want to cook big meals. They were running from places when they didn't want to do fast food, right? And so the idea of, going after the biker, the swimmer, the cyclist, all that, maybe aspirationally some of these people had those ideas, but really the reality and what they look like was very, very, very different. And so creating those aspirational personas feels good a lot of times, but if your data doesn't actually back that up, your advertising is missing the mark at times, your content could be missing the mark. And so it really could have an impact on bottom line, plain and simple.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues is that traditionally, I mean, you've talked about silos already, but you have data teams maybe collecting data, working with data, and then you have marketers, or maybe a lot of that's simplifying things, but you have a lot of different people, and the people dealing with those kinds of campaigns or the ways that you would actually connect with people, and the people dealing with the actual data that would be taken in and analyzed could be very different, perspectives, very different. Maybe they don't even talk to each other necessarily other than memos or something. How have you seen that, hopefully, I guess, improving over time? And what advice do you have for, marketers who might be a little scared of data, and maybe data people who are, not thinking like marketers?
Sure. Well, I think at the end of the day, it starts with first understanding that you are a customer driven business, whether you realize it or not, whether you operate as a corporate culture like that or not, right? If customers aren't buying from you, whether that's B2B, B2C, doesn't matter. If people aren't buying, you're probably not going to be in business any longer, right? And so first stepping back and saying, what can we do to improve that interaction, and kind of coming at it from that more, holistic approach of not product first, but customer first. So I think one, having that, and that comes from leadership, but I mean, it can come from bottom up too. But I mean, I think, leadership really can carry that banner. But beyond that, yeah, I think, I've been in marketing a long time. Marketers used to be scared of data, right? They used to be scared of, data science because it felt controlling and it took the gut, the, oh, I'm going to trust my gut and I'm going to go with this. I'm going to work. It takes the creativity out of it. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. It
Mm.
allows you to focus creativity where it matters, right? Like, don't be guessing all the time and then have to create 10 different versions of content and then like hope one of them works, like the throwing spaghetti at a wall kind of mentality. It's like, let's fine tune. So, using the customer example from before, let's hone in on the fact that we know, parents, and busy parents and empty nesters are kind of our core. They're spending the most money with us. Great. Now go get creative around that. Right now,
Mm.
you've unlocked some code, in the, here's what our customers care about. Here's what they're doing. Now what can we use that? How can we use that? And I think marketers who have seen that happen get very excited about it. Now they're asking for data. Now they're going and finding the data engineer and saying, hey, give me more, give me more, give me more. And I think the data engineers, once they see the outcome, the reverse of that, see the outcome themselves and see it work, they get excited because now data can be very fun. But if you don't know what you're using it for, sometimes like the unending requests of like, oh, send me more, send me this,
Yeah.
gets like monotonous as well. So I think both sides have to see what the other one can do. And so the number one thing I always recommend organizations have is a center of excellence around customer data. Whether you are the most advanced or you're just beginning your journey, getting a group of people together and saying, from cross functional, you've got marketing, you've got data, IT, security, legal, however your company comes together, and talk about what are we collecting? What are we using it for? Where are our gaps? What are our competitors doing? What are they collecting? What are they talking about? There's a lot of different ways just to have those conversations and then showcase the wins, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, IT, here's what I did. And then ideally, the representatives on the Center of Excellence go back and share that and vice versa. But when you get people in a room and you just start to like remind them of things that are happening, like it's amazing how well it works.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more because for me, I see some of that as a sort of a chicken and egg thing. Like if you're coming up with a campaign and hoping to attract the right people, you need to collect data on the people that do or don't come into your campaign, right? But at the same time, like you kind of mentioned, if you know the people that you want to target, you can create better campaigns, right? So I'm wondering, what would you imagine? Maybe you want to dig into that scenario, or maybe you have other examples. But if you're a marketer, what do you actually say, hey, give me more of that data? Because I can imagine a marketer going to a data engineer or whatever, saying, what data do you have? And he or she comes back and says, 52% of people are in a zip code with this and characteristic. That's not the same as being like, these empty nesters are interested in
Right.
health consciousness. That's a much harder data answer, right? Which is much more insightful, but not necessarily what the data will say, at least directly. So how do
Sure.
you actually get that kind of insight? Because I think a lot of people may become frustrated when they say, okay, well, they have incomes between this and this median or whatever. That's not the same as getting those insights that you're talking about for an emotional connection. So how do you start to engineer that better within an organization?
Yeah. So first thing is I think first way to engineer that is to understand what data you're collecting, right? Because I think I know a lot of times marketers will only know what they're directly involved with, right? So if you're the email marketing guy, you know what you're collecting on your email opt-in forms and so forth, but you're not paying any attention to what the loyalty team is bringing in or what
Yeah.
the app team is bringing in. So again, Center of Excellence is a great way to surface that, to create that data dictionary. So you're all talking through. And then it's okay, well, what's our objective? Start at the end, right? What do we want to accomplish? And then back up, what do we need to get there? What do we have in house? And then maybe what do we have to go out and source or get in another fashion? So, you know, just again, let's keep the thread of the customer who we were talking about. They knew they wanted to understand what their ideal customer profile was. So as they pulled their data, they couldn't answer all their questions. There was gaps. So there's
Yeah.
different ways you can solve that. One is you can go buy data. Two is you can do customer research, right? You can start running your own surveys. And they do a lot of surveys now. They do a lot of things around, well, what's your health focus, right? So they do these zero-party surveys where they're asking customers like, why are you needing these healthy meals? Right? Are you keto? Are you paleo? Are you just wanting to eat well? Is it just, and what's important to you? Fast,
Yeah.
convenient, easy, flavorful, so that they can start to put those things together, but they didn't gather that information without having an objective, right? I think knowing where you want to go, right? I want to drive more customers. We need to grow more in this area. We need to do this. Then you step back into it. What do we have? Go to your data engineer and say, hey, what can we get, and work as a team. I think the other side of it is marketers have to know that they may not know the data as well as the data engineer. So don't pretend you do. Like
Yeah.
drop the ego a little bit and go in and say, here's what I'm trying to achieve. Like, help me think through this. Like, what could we pull? Could we look at clickstream data? Could we look at the content that they're consuming? Could we look, oh yeah, we have this. We'd have to connect it this way. We can do like, if you go in with a very specific ask, a lot of times the engineers will just give you that and there's no
Yeah.
critical thinking involved. But they're willing, too often they're sitting there going, well, man, if they'd have just asked for this, I could have given them,
Yeah.
I didn't know that's what they were trying to do. The I didn't know answer, especially when I was in consulting and we got people in a room and you're just like, well, what? You never asked. Well, you never told me. Well, you never asked. Well, you never told me. And so, like, I think when you start to talk about objectives and what you want to achieve, then people can do what they're good at. And the data engineers can be like, hey, I have an idea. This is crazy, but, and the marketers can be like, I love that idea and it's crazy, but, and then you just start to feed off that energy. And it's way more fun. It's a way better way to go through your workday than fighting with data engineers or marketers all day long.
Yeah. And that makes perfect sense, right? Communicating the context, I've heard time and again, is super important because it leads to so many more insights than you would get otherwise. And dropping an ego, I think, is
Yeah.
always a good strategy. How long would it take to build an emotional connection, especially the kind of sort of deeper emotional connection that you're talking about, yeah, what kind of time frames are we dealing with? Obviously, there's a difference between the beginning and the establishment, but then
Yeah.
I'm also curious. Well, I'll let you answer that, and then I want to know a little bit more about, like, the timeline of possible change, redirection or changing a message. But let's start with the original message. So when you're creating a new marketing campaign or something to that effect, what kind of time period are we interested in?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of factors in that idea, right? So one is first acknowledging that not every customer behaves and operates the same, right? So
Yeah.
you go into a campaign with the idea of, okay, who might be involved and what are some of those emotional triggers that we can capitalize on or that we can leverage, right? And so starts in the ideation phase campaign, typically you're looking at, a month to 3 months, typically at a major enterprise, looking at kind of what are we planning out because they're looking at the next quarter or 2 quarters down from a creative perspective. And so a lot of that is going in saying, what do we want to achieve? What do we want our objectives to be? And then, like I said, stopping and saying, okay, this is our target audience. But within that target audience, let's just use a stupid, simple scenario, right? There are people who are introverts and there are people who are extroverts, right? And so if you're doing a travel ad, thinking about your imagery, people who are sitting by the beach reading is going to appeal to, and the introverts are going to be like, I love that. I'm into that. I want to just sit and relax and read.
Yeah.
But showing a party and a bunch of people and networking and talking to people, the introverts are going to be like, not at all. No, that doesn't look like fun, right? So if you think about just two different types of creative of the personality behind that target audience, demographically they're the same, right? They could be 25 to 35, they could be in this income range or whatever, but introvert or extrovert.
Yeah.
So thinking about where can we alter some of the creative, where can we test different variations of the audience, and then that's what you're doing. You're running tests. Just like you are with any other digital creative, but instead of just looking at, did this image perform? It's let's think about the different emotional hooks that we're trying to tie into, right? Whether that's, again, introvert, extrovert, or it can be, happiness, sadness, so going towards happiness, gaining, a gain versus pain, right? Avoiding, getting away from, and thinking about the different types of ways you want to prepare that message. And often you're working with an agency. And so it's a very long-winded answer to say, let's say from a creative perspective, you're doing a month of planning, you're doing a month of development, and then you should be testing it for a month or two around to see which ones resonate, and you have
Yeah.
3 or 4 versions out there and you improve it. And then it's just a cyclical pattern, right? And as you learn, that planning gets shorter for those kind of things. And even a lot of the creative just gets, rebuilt. But it's so easy, especially in digital, so easy to put out 50 to 75 variations of content that are just changes of words, changes of your headline, changes of your call to action based on those different types of emotional triggers that even if you knew nothing about your audience, you could make some assumptions and you could start there. And then you're starting to collect the data to say, oh, this resonates, this doesn't, this does. And then use that to check in the data, who's buying, even if they're clicking through, who's spending the most, right? And going all the way through the cycle and then just iterating one after another after another.
Yeah, and then once you've sort of set up a nice cadence, you feel like you really understand the audience that you're targeting. What do you recommend for sort of longer term? I don't know if like, I doubt very much that a lot of companies want to do a complete turnaround. We're going to be like a party company now. We're for introverts or something. But I do know that people can change. If nothing else, they get older, right? Their life course might change if you're in it for the long term. But how often should you be checking in to the extent that you might change more significantly? So, if people like the color blue or the color red, and that, like, great. So you can do quick A/B testing. But if you're thinking about going in a slightly different direction, or you're realizing what used to work, maybe because of what's going on in the market, doesn't quite work like it used to, what kind of checks should you be doing? How should you be using data once you are
Yep.
established?
So I think then the reality there is you're looking at a couple different things. One is you should always be taking all of your quantitative and assumptions that you're basing off that quantitative data, right? So, oh, this was our highest click, this was our best seller, and marrying that with qualitative data, customer research. Going
Yeah.
out now that somebody's bought, Why did you buy? What mattered to you? What did you care about? And asking those questions. And there's different ways you can do that research. One is you can go with a survey and you can ask specific questions. The other way is you can do you can go and you can talk about a topic. What's important to you? What do you care about? And you kind of back into then, in other words, you let them, they're guiding the conversation and telling you what's important, and you're trying to find commonalities between those conversations with customers. And I think people can do both, and there's benefits to both. Qualitative surveys sometimes tend to be leading. A lot of brands like they want to verify their answer, or they want to validate their answer, and they kind of lead customers down a path of, like NPS scores. Like, everybody feels bad unless they're angry at the brand, everybody feels bad giving them a low score. And so sometimes they can be very self-serving. There's benefits to them, but changing up and asking the same question in different ways is going to unlock insights. So quantitative tied to qualitative. The other way is start to think about machine learning and start to look at affinity groupings or behavioral clusterings, or starting to look at, how are people interacting on their website? How are they interacting with your brand? Looking at all these different touch points, and then letting, clustering, for example, k-means clustering, and there's tons of algorithms, but clustering a consumer based on some of different, key points, right? Recency, frequency, monetary, interaction, NPS scores, and then starting to go back and say, well, what's different between group A and group B, and starting to look at, the different data points. And then, interestingly, you go back to the qualitative and you start to say, okay, this is my assumption. Can I validate that assumption, right? And you start to find groupings that you never knew existed within your major group, right? So I don't have to change from being an extroverted company to an introverted company. But within my extroverted company, I found that there's 5 different groupings within my main grouping. And the reality is some are very seasonal driven. They're never going to interact more than once a year. Like, that's how they, because they don't have a need. Others are like, any opportunity you roll out a new product, they're on, so you start to kind of figure out what is the drivers, and then you can wrap your campaigns around those variations. Because I think the other reality we're seeing is this shift from one size fits all campaigns point to one outcome, to this idea really of micro campaigns and micro objectives and micro focus, because you can really, targeting wise, you can focus, audience wise, channel wise, you can niche it down pretty far. And so you can really, without changing your company, you can change your message to, Chris, you could get a different message than I could get. And yet we could have the same outcome. We're both buying from the company. We're just buying for different reasons. And we're buying for a reason that's meaningful to us.
Yeah, without going too sci-fi, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what direction that might go in, because it occurred to me as I was, a few weeks ago starting to play with Chat GPT. Have you've seen that?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess everyone's started to play with that now. And the idea was, I literally said, come up with 10 catchphrases for this podcast or something, right? And I was thinking that it doesn't seem very far-fetched now that that kind of technology is available to say, put it into some kind of algorithm, artificial intelligence, whatever you want to call it, and target market each person individually or something. Is that at all realistic? And also, should marketers and data scientists be worried about their jobs? Not to get too far-fetched, but I wonder what you think about the newer technologies and the potential.
Yeah. Is it possible? Absolutely. I think it's absolutely possible. And I think I think Chat GPT just announced that Microsoft is investing $10 billion in a 49% stake of their company or whatever. So obviously something's working right in their world. But no, I absolutely think it's a possibility and a likelihood very soon, in ways. I'll caveat that with the sense that, is it going to replace a marketer's job or data science? No, it's not. But can it be a great way to produce a lot of content variations off of off of a theme, where the marketer's net job is now being good at writing a seed for an AI to produce output, and then editing that? Absolutely. Like, I could see that happen. I guarantee that's already happening. People are, just like you did, you write a good seed, you get a bunch of answers back, you go tweak 2 or 3 or 4 of them, and the reality is now stuff we wanted to do as marketers, but we just never had enough time to do. Like, I want to test 10 variations. Now you can, right? And so I think it's going to actually make marketers more valuable, just in different ways. data science saying, because we're going to be now we're going to have all these variations. Now we really want to test them, and we want to start to look for patterns, people to be able to write, more meaningful algorithms. I think the idea of a brand only being able to drive personalization based off, a rule or an explicit rule. Like if you click on this and you click on this, then we're going to show you this. Like that is not going to be, there's a bar that's going to get raised at some point where now we want AI driven journeys and AI driven personalization to happen on a website as a consumer. And so it's going to require other brands to start to invest in that and focus on that and build that. So again, it's just going to shift. It's just going to move, the goalposts a little bit, but I don't think it gets rid of it. I think it just opens up new opportunities.
Yeah, it may also, yeah, like you said, it could change the goalposts in a sense, because what we're dealing with now is, as a customer, we're expecting some kind of like very unique, knowing that it's from probably an AI driven algorithm, but that kind of content coming to us. And so I wonder how you consider emotional connection in that respect. So if I'm a consumer, I click on something, maybe I expect it, at least into the future, to be very unique to me and my needs and my history of however I've been interacting. But I wonder if, like, that sounds to me like I also wouldn't have as much of an emotional connection, because I'm just assuming, this is all mathematical. What should you be thinking about as a marketer, or as an organization, when it comes to that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think the reality is then we're giving consumers way more credit. The reality is like we still like emotional connections, like whether it's coming from a robot or not. Like I think, if it still makes us feel good, I mean, we're simple creatures. We're still going to feel good, right? And so how we got there, I think, is going to be less, because even now we know, we're dealing with a corporate entity that probably doesn't care about us. Yet we still have our favorite brands that like we love and like have never talked to us personally, like, but
Mm.
yet we still would like fight our friends over them, kind of thing. And so we kind of do it now. We're just going to do it differently. So I think in that regard, I don't think consumers are going to be like, oh, because they responded to me AI, I'm not, maybe somebody will. People are also resistant to change. So there's that element of,
Mm.
of it. We also set the bar based on all of our interactions, right? So once a brand does it and it works,
Yeah.
the next interaction you have with another brand doesn't have to be in the same industry, it doesn't have to be in the same vertical. You're going to remember, but they did it, and why can't you? Right. And so I mean, think about your interactions now, listeners. Think about I mean, like you set your criteria and your expectation of how an interaction is going to go based on all of the previous interactions before them, regardless of, was that a B2B interaction? Was that B2C interaction? Was that, a
Yeah.
local restaurant can't compare to, a nationally optimized chain, and none of them can compare to, say, how Amazon operate. Like they're all just very different classes, and yet we all compare them to each other,
Mm.
consciously or subconsciously. And so that's what's going to change the AI game, is when brands start to do it and do it well, and consumers are like, this is cool, or this is easier, or this made my life, I don't have to talk to anybody. I can just chat and get everything done, and it's going to respond. And I'm not frustrated when I walk away because like I feel like I'm, chatting to a wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's gonna drive innovation.
Yeah. So for organizations that are trying to leverage this, and maybe different industries should think about it somewhat differently, but what are some approaches that you think? So people listening to us right now may be saying to themselves, our organization isn't quite there yet. Like, we're not using AI to do individual chats or anything, but we want to be making a better emotional connection with our customers, and we want to be harnessing data to a fuller extent than we are now. What are some of those like big picture questions or approaches that they might want to take?
Yeah. So I would start with the idea that, a customer journey is only as good as the customer is willing to go on that journey. Right. So if you lock yourself in the room and you draw out your customer journey and you say, okay, this is the entry points, and these are the interaction points, and every marketer has gone through a customer journey exercise in their life, and a lot of data people now are doing it, right? Because they're what systems they're interacting with, and they're only as good as the consumer's willing to go through them, right? And so we have to take a customer centric view on it. What is the customer wanting to do? Now, what do you want them to do? What do they
Yeah.
actually want to do? And then from there, think about where can we personalize? Where can we make that experience easier, happier, friendlier, right? Where can we remove friction, pain, right? Or where can we add, gain, add, give them something and a value in exchange, right? So if I'm giving you my email, it's not for the benefit of the brand. It needs to be also for the benefit of the consumer. So what's involved there? And just do that all the way down the line and kind of, you know, honestly, if you don't, I mean, I guarantee every organization has somebody. Find your devil's advocates. Find the people who get your journey in the pace and then let them tear it apart and be like, yes, but I would never do it that way.
Hmm.
I hate interacting. I hate having to call in to validate. I don't know. I'm just making something up. I hate having to call in to validate my PIN code, but our system required. I don't care. I hate doing that. Like it's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you have those people, then you have to say, okay, but what are you have to be open to that. The way we've always done it kind of conversation doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So if you truly want to be serious about it, tear your own process apart. Don't justify it, break it, and then try to find ways to improve it so that it's you in control of that, not the consumer or not your competitors who are going to come up with a better process.
Yeah, I like that. And I wonder, to sort of wrap up this line of thinking, what are maybe one or two things that people could do who are listening to this if they wanted to start that process, if they wanted to really get going, but these seem like huge issues to tackle, right? What are one or two things that they could do today or tomorrow to start to see or build an impact?
Yeah. So if you're on the data side and you don't have a data dictionary that talks about all of the customer data you are collecting within your organization, where it's coming from, what system it is, what you're collecting, and ideally what it's used for, start there. Absolutely
Okay.
start to catalog all of your data. And you can start smaller, right? Okay, email, here's the schema, here's some things. We don't really know what we use it all for. That's fine, but you've got it. And you start to do that all for the systems because I guarantee it opens up conversations now amongst the teams, whether you do a center of excellence or not, being able to just talk about what are we collecting? Why are we collecting it? It has ramifications from a privacy perspective because you'd be like, hey, we shouldn't be collecting that, or we don't need it, or it's causing friction in our form and nobody uses it anymore. It's an old, outdated,
Yeah.
relic value, but having those conversations. The other one, if you're more from a kind of business line of business or marketing side, is if you haven't talked to a customer like on the phone, on Zoom, at a trade show in 3 months, 6 months, a year, pick up the phone, find a customer, get in front of them. And don't just ask them things that are important to you. Ask them about themselves. Ask them what are they struggling with? What do they do? Why do they why did they buy from you?
Yeah.
Would they buy from you again? Why wouldn't they? And tell them, be honest and give them the freedom to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly, because you will learn so much just even in 5 conversations that may not be statistically significant to say, hey, I'm going to go change my entire strategy based on these 5. But if there's smoke, there's fire often.
Mm.
And so if you got 5 people who are what you consider good customers all saying about the same thing, okay, now I have a hypothesis that I need to go work out and I need to go dive into some data. I need to talk to some more. I need to test this out. Are these squeaky wheels or is this a real thing? And often you will gather way more insights into what's going on with your customers just in a 15-minute conversation than you ever would staring at a dashboard all day. But the dashboard then just takes that to scale, right? It builds up and you can say, okay, I understand from this conversation. Oh, regionally, maybe we have a problem. And then you can start to dig, you just start to kind of pick it apart. And do you solve it in a day? Not at all. But yeah, talk to your customers if you haven't and build a data dictionary. Those 2 things will already leap you ahead of most of your competitors.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. And I think anyone listening, like you said, can start on that right away and start to see some big differences if they haven't done it and then they have done it. From those 2 points, it's a definite game changer. So Zach, I really appreciate being able to pick your brain today. If people want to see more of your work or hear more or maybe connect with you, what do you recommend? How should they get in contact or follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in first party data strategy or that's a problem you're trying to solve in the organization, obviously treasuredata.com, you can come to our website and talk a little bit more about customer data platforms. You can request a demo. Personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, Zack Wenthe, Wenthe. I'm there quite often posting and chatting. I'm happy to connect with anybody, carry on the conversation, send me a message, and let me know you listened. But yeah, either professionally, you can, like, again, treasuredata.com, or Zack Wenthe, Wenthe.
Perfect. I appreciate it. That was a lot of great advice packed into a short amount of time, and so yeah, well worth getting together with you. And I'm really glad we could do that. So, just once again, thank you so much for talking to me today, Zack.
Thanks for having me.